What's up, good people? Michael here, host of the political podcast, Cuckoo for Politics. Thank you for listening, and thank you for joining. If you could see, I'm wearing a t-shirt that says Kamala. And if you didn't know how to say her name, say Madam President. That's what I was hoping to wear on November 6th. That's what I was hoping to wear on January 20th, 2025. Well, that did not happen. This episode is titled Aftermath, because it takes place a few weeks after the elections. I'll be honest, this election has taken a profound toll on me, both spiritually and emotionally. Right after the results were finalized, I found myself grappling with a deep sense of despair and feeling a loss in a country that once proudly espoused ideals of individual freedom and equality and the belief that all men are created equal. Even Dr. King, the late and great Dr. King, spoke of his dream that his children will live in a nation where they would not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Yet today I see a nation where that dream feels further away. The religious fervor that once inspired movements for justice and equality seems to hold less today in our politics and shifted towards division through the culture wars. Those of you who have followed the two recent episodes of Cuckoo for Politics, Raw Uncut, titled Selective Memory and Silent Signals, you'd know I've been a vocal supporter of the Vice President and her historical campaign to become the 47th President of the United States. Well, it didn't happen, and to my dismay and anger, she did not succeed. I must admit, I was naive to believe that America was ready to turn the page and embrace a more forward-thinking vision of leadership. I underestimated racism, sexism, the power of whiteness in society, where significant resentment still persists today of America's changing demographics. It's disheartening to witness these forces still shaping our political outcomes, holding us back from the inclusive future we claim to aspire to be. In her place, the country has once again chosen a man whose character flaws and cognitive limitations seem glaringly at odds with the responsibilities of the presidency. So I find myself questioning, am I wrong to feel this way? This found of disappointment? Am I losing faith in America? Joining me in today's discussion are two incredible guests. First is my Raw Uncut sidekick, Sam Jean. For those who are familiar with this podcast, Sam needs no introduction. We've hosted a series of Raw Uncut episodes together, which can be found on the website, cuckooforpolitics.com, or the platform you're listening to right now. Just in brief, Sam and I have been friends for decades, and both of us have earned our respective degrees with distinction. Over the years, we've actively engaged in political activism while excelling in our professional careers. Sam has established his own consulting firm, appeared both in U.S. and global media platforms, and serves as an adjunct professor in law and in communications at an accredited university. Joining me for the first time is my second guest, Dr. Damary Bonilla-Rodriguez. A mouthful, huh? A published author and a nationally recognized leader in diversity, focused leadership development. She brings a wealth of experience from the non-profit, private, and government sectors. Her background expands from Spanish, social work, organizational communications, and a doctorate in executive leadership. She's a sought-after keynote speaker, so the podcast is grateful that she was able to make time for this episode. She supports professional organizations and serves on multiple boards dedicated to social justice efforts. Her accomplishment includes her latest book, Modern Marinismo, excuse me for mispronouncing it, its relevance and the connection to imposter syndrome and perfectionism. She's also a proud mother of 14-year-old twins, Caleb and Joshua, and resides in the Keystone State of Pennsylvania with her husband and sons. All of us are truly cuckoo about politics, and all of us are feeling some type of way following this election. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Cuckoo for Politics. Let's get ready for some insightful discussion while learning something together. What's up, good people? Michael here, host of the political podcast, Cuckoo for Politics. Thank you for joining. Thank you for listening. This subject matter is the aftermath. The election has just concluded, and many of us, by the time you're listening or watching this podcast, you'll be on your way to a respective family's home or friends during the Thanksgiving holiday. And many of you will probably be, reconnecting, reuniting with friends and family and having a very memorable conversation as well as a memorable time. However, I'm sure the subject of politics will come up in some form. Some of you will be elated, like, yes, finally. And some of us will be depressed or feel a sense of deflation because of the fact of the outcome of the election. It could be from the federal office, whether it be the White House or even a senator or a congressman you've been passionately working for or hoping to get elected. Nevertheless, I am joined by two of my guests who one of you, you guys know very well as far as from the Raw Uncut series, Sam Jean, and Dr. Damary is joining us too, sharing some insight on the election. Now, I'll have to say to both of you that I worked the polls, I registered voters, I knocked on doors, I canvassed, I did everything I humanly can to get people motivated, interested in the elections. I even had community engagements, even having conversations at barbershops. I mean, I had to get everybody involved because I was excited about turning the page. I was excited about the platform that the Democratic Party had set. But I will admit, on election night, as I worked the different precincts to make sure everyone was in line in time, keeping people motivated to stay in line as far as 2 or 3.5 hours, depending where you were. I was there until 10 o'clock at night. At the last person, when that person came out, I'm like, great. And then I went home, and then I stayed up. And then I stayed up and I had to go to bed. I'm like, please tell me it's not 2016 again. Well, it happened, 2016 plus, but this time in a different way. The fact that even some senators that I thought would win re-election did not win. So let me ask you, before I go into the details of the campaign, what was your feeling that night of the election? Sam, I'll go with you first.
My feeling, the night of the election, I had no feeling, Michael, because I went to yoga. Okay. I was not going to stay home and watch it like those of us who are addicted to politics, right? You're going to sit there, you're going to watch it. I knew that by the time I got out of yoga, I would have an answer. And so I wasn't going to sit and wait. I went, I got my mind clear, and I prepared myself for whatever the result was going to be. Having said that, I have to admit, you and I spoke offline about it. I felt like it would be close, but I felt that she would win. I'm not going to back away from my initial feel. That's what I felt. I felt that she would win because I made certain assumptions that now I see in retrospect, those assumptions were not met and were not met. And I'm not surprised by the result. In other words, like 2016 was far more surprising to me. This is less surprising to me. For other people, this is more surprising. But for me, this is less surprising given the direction the country has been going in since 2016.
Damary, what was your thoughts that night?
I would say that I share in the sentiment that I knew that it was going to be close. We've been watching that all along, that they were neck and neck in terms of the polls, in terms of conversations locally, and even conversations I had with people in other parts of the country. But I really did think she was going to win. And so I stayed up pretty late. I did watch closely, as you were just saying people do. And then I finally went to sleep for a couple of hours and woke up and thought, it'll be better because she's going to win Pennsylvania, because we worked so hard. And you talked about this in the beginning, right? The canvassing, the events. I mean, all of us gave up so much time with our loved ones, just putting things to the side because it was worth it, because we were reaching voters and understanding the issues and making sure that the short time that she had on the campaign trail was reaching individuals that were undecided, those independent voters, the people that we were not sure about, and hosting events with elected officials, and just knew that Pennsylvania was going that way. And then it didn't. And it was tough. It was tough. I would say for me, it was a little bit different than 2016. I think 2016, you're right, Sam, was a shock. This time around, though, on the one hand, I was shocked. And I think Sam's right. On the other hand, as I look back, I'm thinking, I missed it. I missed some of those comments that people made or things I saw in the news that might have pointed me to, she may not win. And having to tell my kids when they got up before school that she did not win and prepare them about what that meant. I really just wanted to lock my whole family at home for the day and just be sure that we were all safe.
The morning of, I didn't turn on the news. I still didn't know the outcome in the middle of the night. I went to bed and I went to work out. And then I said, okay, slowly, let me see what the results were. And then when I saw that he had won, I will admit I was depressed. I was deflated. I was kind of angry. I'm like, is this America that I woke up to? I lost a sense of hope. I think I was naive to think we've moved forward. The misogyny of the candidate, the derogatory comments he made about everyone, the fact that he was a flawed candidate, he had a criminal record, but it didn't matter. I felt like, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know. I felt like it didn't matter what he stood for, or what he said, how embarrassing he was. I think the power of whiteness came up. I don't know. I was just angry that regardless of what we did, regardless of how far we've come afar, I say the power of whiteness only because I saw a lot of the votes when you see the breakdown. A lot of white men just came out of nowhere. I would say they were there, and they were supporters, because even when I was standing in line, there were some supporters like, yes, I hope she wins. But Trump kind of struck a chord with the white men that were coming after their jobs or something like that. I don't know. Did you get that sentiment? And I'll start with you, Damary.
I would say yes, and that came up in 2016. I was on the ballot for state representative in 2016, and I was so proud to be on the same ballot with Hillary, and who I thought was going to be the first woman president, right? And there were so many white men in areas that had not traditionally come out in our own community here in Pennsylvania and the Poconos that were very angry, they were not for Hillary and they were not for me, right? They didn't want to shake my hand. They made sure that I knew that they were not supportive for me. They were not going to vote for me. And so I saw some of that again this time around, because I worked the polls every election. And there was an older, not old, but older white man who came over with a red flannel shirt, had a couple buttons opened up, and he was smoking a cigarette. And he came over to the table and yelled. I mean, he had this negative energy as soon as he got out of his car. And he yelled, you're with the wrong candidate. And we let him be. And then he yelled again, but very angrily. And I said, sir, luckily we still have choice about which candidate we want to support. And he kept yelling as he was walking away, well, you're with the wrong candidate and we don't want her for another 4 years. And then I said, sir, we don't want you smoking in our open air and polluting our air, but you have the choice to do that, right? And then he came back out and yelled again. And there was a bit of that. There were people that were dressed in garbage bags. And so what I saw was people taking his rhetoric and what I personally would not accept from my children, from people around me, and they took it with them publicly, and they took it with them to the polls. So it didn't matter that it was bad behavior, and it didn't matter that, he's calling people names and doing all of these things that we tell our kids, you can't do that. That's not acceptable. That's not how we treat people. And that showed up at the polls.
Sam?
I mean, I have a lot to say about this. I've been saying this a lot. One of the things that is difficult to bear is listening to the media doing their post-mortem about the election and their takeaways from it. And I think that what has depressed me the most is really their takeaway about what this election means, because the media takes this to mean that the people that Dr. Bonilla was referring to earlier, the people who show up wearing their garbage bags, the people who show up being hyper aggressive and being upset that you support some other candidate. What the media is saying is that their reasons, whatever their reasons are, especially the men, you have disaffected white men, and that the Democratic Party needs to do something about these disaffected white men. This is their takeaway. Their takeaway isn't that if they're disaffected, what is it that they're disaffected by? And try to address that. And when you look at the policy proposals the Democrats tend to put forward, they are designed to address this disaffection that these men supposedly have. But the way that the media landscape is, the way that we cover politics, we frame the issues in the ways that Republicans ask us to frame them. Okay? So we frame the border issue as a border issue because that's what Republicans call it, right? We frame inflation as what's concerning to everyone because that's how Republicans frame it. We talk about crime, even this conversation about trans, which didn't really play much in California. I didn't see many ads about that, but I heard that there were quite a few ads about it in Pennsylvania, quite a few ads about it in Wisconsin, an issue that isn't on the forefront of most people's minds, by the way. Okay. But because our media has extensively covered this issue because Republicans say it's important, we end up responding to it. But those of us know why she lost, but now we're not allowed to say it because if we say it, we're missing the point. If we say it, we're elitist. If we say it, we're out of touch. But those of us who live it every day, we know exactly why they didn't vote for her. We know exactly why they didn't vote for her. And I wish that instead of Democrats pointing fingers at each other and saying, you didn't do enough, you didn't do enough, you didn't do enough, or trying to explain the loss, sometimes you lose and you did everything you could do. Sometimes you lose and you did the right thing.
She did absolutely everything humanly possible to reach out to all demographics, all interest groups. I'm amazed that she had 107 days to run a full operational campaign when Trump had, I would say, 4 years. I mean, he's been running since he lost the last election. He was able to establish himself within his own party, as well as get the machinery the way he wanted. People criticize that the President Biden should have left office early to give time for the Democrats to run a primary. I don't believe any of that would have happened or would have changed the outcome. They're saying that Harris should have talked more about specific issues more clearly. Maybe so. You could tweak your message here and there about the economics, talking about the border crisis. But I don't think, regardless of the fact, no matter what she said, I don't think I would say America is still not ready for a woman, particularly a Black woman, to be president. And that watching the Sunday talk shows, that's what they were even talking about. Most of those hosts were talking about, is America ready? And it seems like they're not. I mean, they're going to switch it, to your point, Sam, that she didn't say the message clearly. She didn't define herself. President Biden should have left. Speaker Pelosi made a comment. I don't think any of that would have mattered. The fact is, everyone knows.
Everybody has an opinion, and everybody has a take. But we have to stop making it seem like people's takes are actually accurate. You know, sometimes the take isn't accurate. And of course, a candidate could always do more after it's all said and done, right? you can be like, oh, she could have done this. She could have said this, right? When we do our podcast, when we talk offline, we're like, oh, we didn't say this. Maybe we should have talked about this. You could always improve it. But there is no perfect candidate who has a perfect message, who people are going to agree with 100% of the time. So then you have to look at, what did she actually do? And here's the thing, Michael, and this is what frustrates me. Before the election happened, none of these people are saying she's running a terrible campaign. They're all talking about, look at how much money she raised. Look at the enthusiasm. Look at all this stuff. Look at the polling. No one sat back and said, oh, she's doing such a terrible job. But once she loses, instead of actually addressing the real issues of why she loses, they immediately go to, she must have done something wrong. But what does that tell you? If you think that a candidate should have won, should have never lost to this person, yet she still loses to that person, what does that tell you? And those are the things we don't want to address.
And you know what? I want to piggyback on that, because you're absolutely right, Tim. There's no one candidate that can please everyone. And we know that from doing the work. We know that from running. We know that from just working with people, right? Because everybody has their needs, their desires, their preferences, their beliefs. When she would say more, people would say it was a word salad, because they were intimidated by terminology that they didn't know that she was using, because they were intimidated by a woman who was able to speak to the issues, talk about her life experience, and laugh and give a message of joy and hope. And how dare she? And one of the ways that I was following the election, because of the work that I do in leadership development and DEI, is that I was reading, as I always do this when I'm trying to learn what people are thinking. I was reading the comments. So I go on X or Twitter, I go on Instagram, I go on Facebook, and I read comments and I look at where are people logging in from, what parts of the country, right? So that I can understand those geographic differences. And it was clear to me that people were intimidated. And I was reading things where men were saying, go back to the kitchen. We need to go back to the time when women couldn't vote. All of these things that were just comments, but showed up at the polls, right? So we can't take for granted when somebody spews rhetoric, when somebody spews hate, just like when Trump does it from the rally or at a press conference, and people say, oh, he's not going to really do that. He just talks. He's a talk. First of all, why are we letting him just talk? This is our life we're talking about. Second of all, if you don't think he's going to do something, why are you voting for him and putting your trust in him? So, it's disingenuous to say that I voted for Trump because of his policies, or I voted for Trump because of, but I didn't vote for her because of a word salad, because she said too much, or she didn't talk about policy enough. So which one is it? Did she not talk enough, or did she talk too much?
Yeah, no, agreed. I think they had so many excuses. And I can't believe, when I look at the breakdown, Trump made so many inroads in areas that he had his base, but he actually expanded his base to African Americans, to Asians, and the Latino community. I was shocked. I thought it was a done deal when he called Puerto Rico, or no, the comedian actually called Puerto Rico, I think, a floating garbage state. I'm paraphrasing. And he never backtracked. I was surprised how, when he called, Haitians eating cats and dogs, he even made inroads with the Haitian American community, which baffled my mind. I don't even understand that. And people are saying, well, it's his economic policies. Is it? Does character not matter anymore? And I'll say this, Damary, I was surprised. Harris came to Allentown, Pennsylvania, right after. The people, the demographics that were there, they were not Latino. There were sprinkles, but a large part, the attendants who went to that rally right before election day were mostly white, and blacks, but mostly white. And I was surprised that the Latino population that lived majority in that area did not show up. What's your take?
I was going to wait for Sam to go first, because I didn't want to get too in without hearing from him. But a couple of things. One, we had so many surrogates from elected officials from every state at the national level coming to the state of Pennsylvania. We had actors and actresses and just all of these individuals that took time out of their really busy schedules, put their life on hold to come here and meet the community. Now, I know there are, individuals from different racial and ethnic backgrounds that thought, oh, that doesn't do anything for me. Again, reading the comments on social media, I don't get convinced by celebrities. That doesn't faze me. With the Latino community, we generally do have good relationships and appreciation for Latinos that have made it in the entertainment industry, because we know how challenging that is. And there's always this familial connection. And I saw some excitement. I was in Bethlehem a couple of weeks ago for Lin-Manuel Miranda. Also, Maya Harris came, and I was in Reading for Rosie Perez and Wilson Cruz, and I was in Allentown for Maria from Sesame Street, and I was in Allentown for AOC. And so I went to as many things as I could attend. There were Latinos there, but in looking back, it is exactly what you described. They were not there in the numbers that I was on the go, right? I was excited. I was on the go. I did not see it until I looked back and said, oh, they really weren't there. When we looked at the data around Allentown, Reading, Hazleton, Bucks County, Latinos voted for Trump in higher numbers than I would have expected and liked. Right? So it's interesting. However, when we talk about the cultural nuances, when we talk about the roles that Latina women and Latino men are expected to play, it makes a little bit more sense. I'm not going to say that it was just Latinos and especially Latino men that this outcome rested on, because at the end of the day, the majority of his voters were white individuals, particularly white men. However, I was disappointed and disgusted and have really had to go through the emotions of what is it that he would have to do for you to turn away? And what is it that she would have to do for you to give her a chance? There's not an answer to that, but knowing that some of my own relatives voted for him instead of voting for her. Your point about the comment from the comedian, all of a sudden they were saying, well, maybe it was a Democratic plant, maybe the Democrats, or, they were defending and saying, well, Trump didn't actually say it. And I'm thinking, isn't it obvious that it aligns with his rhetoric that he's been spewing for years? Isn't it obvious that this is his platform that was shared with this person to say this? And then you had the people that were saying, well, there is a garbage problem in Puerto Rico. Well, yes, well, let's address that. Let's not have a comedian be the person that is bringing up a serious issue on the island. Let's address that, right? And why was it that the same day that she was presenting a plan for Puerto Rico in Philadelphia, spending the day with the Latino community, this was happening at his rally in New York, and he did not have a plan for Puerto Rico? And he never had a plan for Puerto Rico. And why is it that people are holding her more accountable as vice president than they held him as president for 4 years? And, I had a book published in April about cultural nuances, Marianismo, machismo, perfectionism, and the imposter syndrome. And a little glimmer of hope that I had was, well, I'm glad this is available because I needed it for myself right now. And it's going to be an opportunity for others to look at it, to really understand what is underlying for why men in my community are intimidated by women that can sit on a podcast and have a political conversation. But guess what? I can throw down in the kitchen and make a meal for my family too. It doesn't change what I'm able to do. But there are men that are intimidated. And on the contrast, there are women that do not want to push the envelope because of the way that they grew up. And so being one of the less than 1% of Latinas in the country that have a doctorate, this is my experience. And I realized that's why I signed on to what she meant for me personally and for so many women across the country and for so many people across the country. But where does it leave us now?
Sam, what's your take? I was going to see if I could share what you sent about the breakdown, but you could talk about your opinion.
There are a couple of things. There are more than a couple of things. There are a lot of things where Democrats are not very good. And I'm going to explain them to my Democratic friends, one who's run for office, one who's managed offices for people, one who's managed campaigns for people running for office. One of the things that we have is we have this problem, and I call it's the problem of reasonableness, right? We think that if we just explain something to someone and it's reasonable and we have facts and we have data, and if we explain it to them, that they will accept our logic about it, because we tend to go through the world a certain way. But what we don't seem to understand is that people get their information elsewhere. Now, they get some information from the traditional news outlets, but I'll give you an example, Michael. If I want to know what's going on in Haiti, I call my mother. And when I speak to my mother, I'm like, okay, Mom, what's going on? And she's like, oh, no problem. And she sends me a YouTube link. And when she sends me the link, and my mom is in her mid-80s, when she sends me the YouTube link, it is highly relevant about what I asked her. And I was like, Mom, how did you find this? And she was like, oh, it's very easy. I have my resources. And my mom is also a person who watches CNN all the time. But there are people in this country, particularly men, who get their information from social media, who get their news from social media, who get their ideas about life from social media. And within that bubble, it's almost impossible to compete, because every day the algorithm sends them information that tells them women are sneaky, can't trust them, this country's being taken away. Look at, you can't be a man anymore. You're not allowed to share your feelings. If you exhibit any kind of masculinity, it's considered toxic. Oh my gosh, women would feel safer with a bear than with a man. All these things, you have to compete against that. That's one aspect of it. Number two, there is this aspect that there is this feeling that Democrats have promised people things and they somehow haven't delivered, because Democrats do a terrible job of explaining to people what they've done. The last time we spoke, I said, Mike, if you ask the average person who was president in 2020, they'd tell you Joe Biden. Okay? Joe Biden wasn't the president in 2020. Inflation started in 2019, 2020. But people have this perception. That's one. Number two, Trump is a celebrity. And there is power in celebrity. And as much as I want to pretend there isn't, this is why when people are like, oh, of course, I'm not going to vote for someone because they're a celebrity. But here's the power of celebrity for Trump. Trump's celebrity is rooted in the fact that he's considered a successful businessman. Like, Trump is not a celebrity because he was a professional athlete or because he invented something. Trump is a celebrity because there is this myth that he is a CEO and that he understands business, right? And so because of a television show, we think that Trump knows a lot about the economy because he's a supposed businessman. But if you look at the facts, the man has bankrupted almost every business that he's ever done. So in terms of him being a successful businessman, that's a fact. But how do you compete with that when there is this perception of it? And then we get to the issue of, and Dr. Bonilla knows more about this than I do, about implicit versus explicit bias, right? There is this kind of stuff that people have in them that when they shut the thing, it's them and their conscience. And there are things that people feel a certain way. And especially what's happened since the election, is there are people there are people who voted because they want to take revenge on someone. The country has gone to quote unquote woke. Okay. DEI is out of control. All this stuff. And all these things, the multitude of things, they end up playing. But having said all that, there is no Democrat who could be convicted of 34 felonies, who is an adjudicated rapist. That's not me saying it. Okay, that's a court of law. Who's an adjudicated sexual assaulter. Okay? There is no one on the Democratic side who admittedly has paid money for sexual intercourse with pornographic actresses. I gotta laugh. It makes me laugh. You either laugh because there's no Democrat on the other side who could get people to vote for them by simply saying, "I'm good on the economy." Like it wouldn't even happen. And you talked about this issue about whether character matters. I'm not a person who's going to say I'm not going to vote for someone because they were unfaithful to their spouse. I'm not that kind of a person, right? However, I even have my limits. And this isn't about, Trump having a moral failing here or there. The guy is a perpetual walk of moral failure, and the people don't care. It doesn't matter to them. And so highlighting how awful he is turns out to be meaningless because the people don't care that he's awful, and some of them actually don't think he's awful enough.
I'm thinking of when you said celebrity, and I had to do a Google search because I couldn't remember his name offhand. I think of Senator Al Franken. He was asked to step down because of a text he sent years ago before he was actually a senator. And then he was asked to step down because there was a high morale bar. And now that's all thrown out the window. We had what was the governor from Minnesota too? He was a wrestler, Jesse. Yeah, he ran, and what do you call it? You're right about the celebrity status. No one knew his policies. He ran. He was very popular. But Trump, on the other hand, as flawed as he is, he won. I think what did they say? They said he was able to, even though he said things ridiculous, he was able to put that image or that perception in the voter's mind that the reason why you're in this economic situation is because of others. And they had to look around. Who's the others? Whoever doesn't look like you, that is the reason why you are not successful, why you have 2 or 3 jobs, why you're still behind on your bills, why minimum wage is still $7.25. When we all know facts, when you're saying, well, no, it's actually the federal minimum wage never was raised because the Senate and the House failed to even get it out from committee or even debated on the floor. So there is that, to your point, Sam, that the Democrats have the perception that we have not carried out our mandate or our advocacy for raising the minimum wage. I'm just using that as an example. But part of the problem is the system. We've tried, but it's always failed. It never moved forward. I don't know what we could do to change that. Is it go back to basics, civics, telling people how government works? I don't know what we could change, what attitude, but what's ingrained right now is, the fear of others. That woman did that to me, and it doesn't matter. It just, you have to put that fear, that stroke of division in order to move forward. And I think that's how Trump was able to be successful, because there's no economic value. Drill, baby, drill is not, when you ask a question, how do you plan to deal with caregiving or inflation of prices? All he keeps saying is drill, baby, drill. And now he's saying, give me 12 months. Everything will be half priced.
The two of you gave me so many different feelings and thoughts because, as I'm hearing you, I'm getting upset all over again. I'm getting frustrated all over again because you're saying it and I'm remembering it. And I was frustrated when he said it, but apparently nobody else was that voted for him, right? So I agree that his base is his base. I think there were people that were waiting for 4 years to put him back in office because they were pissed that he lost the last election, right? So I'm going to kind of take those people aside. Or, we say vote down ballot, Republicans that do that, okay. But the individuals that did not ask questions like you were just asking, like, what does it really mean when I hear you say drill, baby, drill? Like, what does that really mean? How is that going to translate into caregiving support for my elderly parent or my children or the real needs that I have in order to be able to get to work, to not have to work 2 jobs, to be able to make a sustainable wage, all of these things that they still don't have answers to. But because he's saying, I'm going to fix it, they voted for him and they felt like he had a policy. But I didn't hear those policies, right? And then there are another demographic. And while we're not trying to clump people together, I was at church this morning and I heard it again. They're the religious folk, those individuals that are saying he's more aligned with the Bible. And I have to tell both of y'all that from 2016 till just a couple of months ago, I try my best not to be petty. I try when I want to post something to be very deliberate about putting it on my page with a disclaimer, right? When I'm not going to debate, I'll say, I'm not going to debate this. This is my absolute. And I will just even say, I may delete your comment if I'm not going to deal with it. Like, just know. But I've been a bit more petty recently, and even today, because it pisses me off when people hide behind the Bible, when they hide behind God, when they hide behind. So because I'm a woman, because I have blue hair, because I get my nails done, because of all of these things that are not conservative, are not womanly, are not within those boxes that I'm supposed to be in, I'm never Christian enough, right? Because I fight for LGBTQIA plus, because I fight for immigrants, I'm not American enough. So there are all of these labels that are on me when I'm out talking about politics. So that's why I know we can never please everybody. But when someone uses a scripture, because I know the Bible, because I grew up in church. So when somebody uses a scripture and I'm thinking, you're manipulating that information, or you really are that blind that you're using it to defend him, or you're stuck on this one issue of abortion or a trans flag in the classroom, or so, I've been saying to people, it's obvious to me that you want to control people's lives. And actually the God that I know and the Bible that I know says that he gives me the free will as to whether or not I even want to accept him as my God. So why are you missing that? And when you say that you don't care about Trump's personality because his policies align with the Bible, well, someone's personality, which to me is not his personality, it's actual behavior and language, which the Bible says that what comes out of your mouth is actually inside of you, coming from your belly, which means it's who he is at his core. That's what's going to influence the policies that he's going to put forth. So you're so blinded by someone else having a choice about whether or not they're going to have an abortion that you're willing to put your trust in that person. And there's this almost God image that religious individuals have put on him. Somebody said to me yesterday, he's not the Messiah, but he's the closest thing to God. And I'll say, oh my goodness, the closest thing to, or, well, at the end of the day, I'm voting Republican. I'm voting with Trump because we're Christians and we have morals. Well, what morals do you really have if you think it's okay to call Nancy Pelosi a B, but I'm not going to pronounce the whole word because I have grown. See, years ago, I would have said the whole word. And that's the concept that gets to people. And that's why when he gives a concept of a policy, they fall for it, right? Because they're so blinded by everything else.
There's a concept of a plan, not a concrete plan. And point to the transgender. I think Sam was saying that he never saw it, but I was seeing repeatedly commercials where, Johnny or Sally, they made sure the actors were white. They left and went on a school bus. And then when they came back, their son and daughter changed to the opposite sex. I mean, that image is there. And then when I'm driving down to that point, Damary, you said about the image of God, I would see images of Trump as an image of Rocky, as well as carrying the Bible. Imagery was just like, I was just shaking my head. Where are you getting this from? And the perception was there and it was ingrained. Not to cut you off, Sam, but you had those thoughts in my head. I want to chime in. What do you think?
Couple of things. One, remember during the debate, they asked him, what's your healthcare plan? He says, I have an idea of a plan, right? It's anybody who says to me, I like Trump's policies, I ask them specifically, well, what policy? And to a person, there's really never any specific policy, right? When someone says, okay, I said, well, what's Trump's economic policy? What's Trump's tax plan? The problem is I can tell you what it is, right? It's to extend the tax breaks that he gave, and that's really it, okay? That's Trump's tax plan. What's Trump's plans to reduce the price of eggs? Oh, we're going to put tariffs on China. Well, what does tariffs on China have to do with the price of eggs, right? So there's a lot of stuff that people say, but they don't know what his economic policy is. They've just been told that he has one, and they've been told that she doesn't. And so they're just going to, they're going to repeat that. But Trump's thing, and this is the brilliance of how Republicans operate in the political sphere is this, is a lot of the things that they want, and Bernie Sanders has said this, a lot of the things that you go to Americans and you say, hey, do you think you should have free healthcare? Most Americans say yes. Most Americans absolutely say yes. They say you should have it. Or if you say to them, hey, do you think that you should like lose your house because you got cancer? Right? No American is going to be like, oh, no, that's awful, right? Do you think that you should be able to get a decent education? Yes. Do you think that the government should make sure that everybody's safe? And that means housing, right? Like everybody's safe, everybody has it. Most people would be like, oh, sure. But Republicans don't want any of that. What they want are tax cuts for corporations. They want to benefit the top 1%. They only care about the market, and they'll tell you that. But they can't really say, hey, we're not going to give you health care. So what they do is they get you to fight. They get a white working class person to fight with a black working class person. And that fight isn't a class fight. It's a race fight. Okay? They get men and women to fight with one another. That fight isn't even a class fight. It's a gender fight, right? They get religious people to argue with non-religious people. And here's the thing. If you went to the heart of what almost every religion talks about, is treating people decently, right? So there are very few people who claim to be religious who would fight with you if you said, hey, part of our religion is that we should treat people decently. And so they get people fighting about that, but it's not a class fight. And so the fights that we should be having, we aren't having because we are in opposition. The disaffected white guy, instead of seeing me as his friend or ally or a person who's in the same boat as me, he sees me as an enemy. That's one. You can other people. The other thing is, this is as old as apple pie. Americans like punching down, okay? They like punching down. We like to pretend like we're so good and we're so just, but we like punching down because how else can a person who came here illegally, by the way, who managed to get citizenship, turn around and say another person who did the exact same thing they did is a criminal and isn't entitled to the same opportunity that they got? Okay? How is that even possible? If you talk to Trump, okay, Trump, what's your policy? We're just going to deport. And now here's what I believe. I believe they'll round up a few people for show, and they will immediately be like, we deported these people. And the media will report it. Trump carries out mass deportation. And there won't be mass deportation because we know if there's mass deportation, there are a lot of industries in this country that would be ground to a halt. So there's a lot of stuff with it. But here's my thing to end on people who claim to be religious. I no longer claim to be religious. Okay. So I'm not judging you on my standard. And I've said this before. I'm judging you on what you say you believe. You say you don't believe in idolatry, okay, which is that God is above everything else and no person is above God. Yet you're a member of a cult. You're likening Trump to Jesus? That's crazy blasphemous, like to a person who actually believes that.
You think they got it from Trump's Bible that he sold? Oh,
the one that he was holding China? Upside down? It's crazy. A Bible made in China. And Trump's name is on a Bible like he's Gideon, right? Like it's completely it's so outrageous that the things they say they believe in, that they're gonna vote for Trump. You actually, and here's the last thing I want to say: the misogyny and the sexism, it's too much. Like at this point, right after the election, Black women, women of color are getting texts about their bodies, and then women in general are getting these crazy texts. What does any of that have to do with economic anxiety? What does any of that have to do with inflation? What does any of that have to do with white men feeling like they've been left behind? What does any of that have to do with that? Right? None of it has anything to do with that. And it demonstrates to you where they are. And when you say they're sexist, They have they've accepted things from this man that they wouldn't accept. They called the vice president of the United States a whore because who she dated when she was a young woman. And this man has been married how many times? This man has paid for sex, and you're calling her a whore according to your religious principles, but somehow he's immune from it because he's born again and she's not? It doesn't even listen.
Sam, you're going to make me jump out of my seat.
Yo, no,
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. This is good.
I'm not here to sugarcoat it. I'm not here to sugarcoat it.
We don't have time to sugarcoat it.
No.
Have you seen the apparel? Have you seen all the things now that are saying your body, my choice? It's blown up. There are shirts, there are aprons, there are hats that say your body, my choice. How dare anybody put that out there? We've had a conversation, my husband and I, with our 14-year-old twin boys about what all of this means. And we've said to them, pay attention to people in your class, pay attention to your teachers, pay attention this morning when we go to church, pay attention to what is said, be on the lookout and be aware. And when you see something that is wrong, when you see someone in danger, speak up about it. And if you need an adult to help, help. And if all else fails, you make sure that you call on us because like my husband said to them, we went into detail with them. And my husband said to them, the only thing I know is that your mother is not going to sit quietly by and let all of this go down like that. And, but that's because this is our life's work. And to know that all that we've already done, building on the shoulders of so many who did more before me, before us, that it's gone backwards. My husband is not generally a politically inclined person. He votes every year. We vote as a family when the boys get out of school every year. That's our thing because he's civically engaged, but he hates politics. And he said, this year I'm voting, because I said, do you want to vote early? Because he's been sick, he's been at home. And he said, no, this year I'm voting in person for sure. And he's like, I don't care how long I have to wait. And he's speaking up because he's frustrated because as a father of two Puerto Rican men, young men, they're 14, they just started high school in an area where we live in Pike County. It's only 9% Hispanic, right? They aren't the majority. We've worked hard for them to have a voice as it is. And now this is happening. Where does that leave them? And I even had the conversation with them this morning and said, I just want you to know that we're going to go in very deep now, deeper than we've ever gone. Now, we've been talking with them about diversity issues since they were in preschool because they got called a spick in their preschool in the Poconos. So they know it. But I was like, we're going to take a deep dive right now. I said, when we've talked about slavery when you were in second grade and you knew that your dad would not have been allowed to go into a restaurant because of the tan skin versus the three of us. And now what you're listening to, what does that mean to you, right? So we do have to rework the way that we are educating. And Sam, you touched on this earlier, the way that we are educating at home, in our communities, how are we talking to voters about these issues? Because it wasn't getting through the way that we were doing it, right? What we thought was obvious was not obvious. And my response to people that were calling her a whore and talking about how she, did all of these things on her way up was you must have been in the room to know it because you're speaking about it with such conviction that you must have watched. You claim that she was giving blowjobs. Did you get one along the way? Because how else would you know, right? I told y'all I let myself get petty because it was too much.
This is, I do want to bring you guys back on the show because there's still so much more that I would love to touch upon. But thank you both for joining on this Cuckoo for Politics, the aftermath. I think we'll just have to do a part 2. In any event, stay tuned for my closing thoughts. It's a wrap, good people. I hope you enjoyed the discussion. And I ask that you subscribe to this podcast, which can be found on most popular podcast platforms, such as Apple, Spotify, or this YouTube channel. Past episodes can be found on the cuckooforpolitics.com website. I ask that you subscribe, and I thank you for support. I forgot, I also have social media accounts. You can follow me on Facebook, Cuckoo4 Politics, or on Instagram, Cuckoo_4 Politics. Again, I appreciate your feedback and your support. Now, many of you will be listening to this podcast or watching it during this upcoming holiday season. Safe travels however you get home. And the topic of this election will come up. How can that be? Some of you will be elated. The MAGA supporters were like, yes, our man won. You'll be waving that MAGA flag for the next 4 years. Hey, you waved it when he lost in 2020. You definitely be waving it now. Some of you will be like, what did this country become? It means a lot. It means a lot to a whole host of things. Happy, elated, depressed, another 4 years of this crap that we have to go through. But it speaks volumes on different fronts. The country elected a failed businessman, elected a known racist, elected who has the support of white nationalists, elected, the list goes on, a twice impeached president. For one, he led an insurrection. Remember, he swore an oath to defend and protect America, yet he led and inspired an insurrection against the country he swore to defend. He was elected. How is that possible? I spoke to some members of the law enforcement community who voted for Donald Trump. It didn't bother them that when he inspired on January 6th, that 174 officers were hurt, 11 were killed, some even committed suicide. It bothered them, but it did not waver their support for Donald J. Trump. How is that possible? The man, there's no words to describe. But this election underscores another uncomfortable reality. The presidency seems to be reserved for white men only. President Obama seems to be the one-time anomaly until further notice. It underscores something else. Look at his picks for cabinet. Yes, there's sprinkles of women, but it's not as diverse as the current administration. President Biden made sure not only were these individuals experienced and they could run such a large bureaucracy, but they were diverse. This, so far, picks are as long as you were on Fox, you're hired. As long as you love Donald Trump, you're hired. Your loyalty will be to him alone and not to the country or the bureaucracy you serve. That's what it seems like the qualifications are. Yes, people. Even Senator Tim Scott from South Carolina, Byron Donalds, congressman from Florida. You remember, they defended Donald Trump on national media, no matter his antics or his rhetoric. Yet none of them were even considered a cabinet post. What does that say? That's not your black job. Stay in your lane. And they don't even see it. They're still defending him. Unbelievable. There's words that we use about people like him. Look, think about it. Matt Gaetz, who withdrew his nomination for Attorney General, but he was even considered before Tim Scott or Byron Donalds. What does that say? And he was under investigation for having sex with a minor, illicit drug use. Come on, man. He was even considered before Tim Scott and Donalds or any other black pick. Think about it. Again, when I say Donald Trump is a racist, he is a racist. Anyway, I keep going. I don't know. It just boggles my mind. It boggles my mind. Here's another thing. Donald Trump's election has another turn of events. It's a sense of despair. This country, is it for us, people of color? Is it for us who believe in sense of community? Is it for us who believe in the ideals and principles of America? I don't know. I'm still frustrated. I'm still annoyed. People I speak to are still annoyed. We're going to get over it. We're going to be still active, but it gives a sense of despair. It's hard to wonder, does this country belong to us? I'm not looking forward to another 4 years. Of what it presents. But I'm not out of the game. I will still be active. I will still engage with voters. I will still be having community engagements. Hey, yes, I'm going to brush my shoulders off. I'm going to get back on a horse, and I encourage all of you to do the same. I'm going to close with this from a quote from Shirley Chisholm. She ran for office in the 1970s. And her quote is this: "At present, our country needs women's idealism and determination, perhaps more in politics than anywhere else. We must reject not only the stereotypes that others hold of us, but also the stereotypes that we hold to ourselves." Vice President Harris, think about running again. Other women who are thinking about running, getting into public office, do it. Other persons of color, black men, you name it, get engaged. Think about it. We need to stay active. We need to hold this administration accountable. And this feeling of despair is only temporary. We must remind ourselves that Donald Trump represents just another chapter in American history. It is not the whole story of American history. Stay engaged, people. This is Michael, host of the political podcast, Cuckoo for Politics. Until the next episode, stay blessed.